I, oh, okay. And I was, okay, being recorded, wonderful. Now, I'm just going to share my screen, hopefully, and you should all be able to see that, and I should still be able to see most of you. I really want to see your faces. Okay. And put you into presenter view. Okay, lovely. All right, so I was actually telling Yoko and Scott before that this is kind of like 3 presentations in one. I don't know what I was thinking, you know. We are going to talk a lot about my research that I'm currently doing, diversity in the classroom, and then teaching some. I'm going to share some resources that I use in the classroom, and then I would like us to kind of share our ideas, because I'm sure that you all have amazing things that you do in the class that we can share and get a richer experience. So really this is a 3 presentations in one. And because of the time today, of course, and I'm sure you've got lots of other things that you need to be doing today, I won't be focusing exclusively on the research. I literally need an hour and a half. But if you want to hear more about that, I'll be doing a talk at the JALT National. And then the next day, I'll be doing a workshop about cultural diversity and the activities that we can use. Some of them you may recognize from today if you decide to come to that. But that's kind of why we're sort of, I won't be going into so much detail. So as Scott said, I am from England, from the middle of England. I come from the city of Nottingham, and I've lived in Japan for most of my adult life. I came here straight out of university, and so I've worked in many different contexts within Japan. Probably like many long-termers, long-termers, we came for a year, and then, you know, it turned into 20 odd years. So I've had a lot of experience within ELT. Now, let's start with the research, and then we can chat more later. So this is my current study. It's about Black female ELT professionals in Japan, because there's been some really great research on language teacher identity, as I'm sure you're aware, and female language teacher identity in Japan. But looking at Black female ELTs, that has actually never been done. There's very little out there, and what is out there, I've written it. Okay. It's only 2 papers, but you know, there isn't a lot out there. So there is a gap there. And the reason that I think this is valuable is because there are so many more women who identify as Black working in Japan now. When I first came to Japan, and when I would go to a JALT conference, it was just me. But now I can see that there are other, you know, people around, and that's really wonderful. And this is evidenced by the fact that now more women from the Caribbean are coming, countries that are, you know, predominantly Black countries, people of African descent. So for example, in 2017, 84% of the JET program ALTs were Black and female. And then it's also evidenced by online groups that now have actually become offline groups as well, like the Black Women in Japan friendship group. At the moment, we have over 3,000 members. I know you're thinking, where are all these women? Okay, they're just everywhere in the most remote corners of Japan, very much like I was when I first came here at the top of the mountain somewhere. So there are more of us, and I think it's important to look at the contribution that, you know, Black women are making to ELT in Japan, as it is with any minority or all of us, because we all have differences. We all have, you know, diverse identities, and I think when you bring that into the classroom, it's a richer experience for the students. So now I'd just like to define what I mean when I say Black. I'm looking at women of African descent who self-identify as Black. In the UK, for example, Black is used more as a political term to bring together, you know, the Asian community and the African descended community. But that's just outside of the scope of this study, although I would love to do that, and maybe I will one day. It's just too big. So we're looking at, you know, women of African descent and women who are from English-speaking countries where the mother tongue is English or English is an official language. So moving on, here are some of my participants. These are the ones I have so far. I'd like to add a couple more. And you can see that they're different ages, all from their 20s, goes up to their 50s, different nationalities, South African, Dutch, Jamaica, USA, and the UK. I would like one more woman from the UK, but you know, as I said before to you, Scott, we're a rare breed, okay? But I'm looking. And this is the time that they have spent in Japan. You know, the lowest being 4 years, and you know, the highest is Bella at 27 years. And you can see here that they've worked in different ELT contexts. So Lorato started as a JET, but now she works in a private high school, and they've moved between contexts. So real rich experience really in ELT. I've put a little column over here for the other contexts that women, that women may work in. Because, and not all of the women have, you know, other things that they do outside of ELT. But the reason I think it's important to include it is because these things that they do actually inform on how they are in the classroom. So for example, Bella, she's a singer, an amazing singer, actually. And she actually teaches at a music school. And Kate, she started her own NPO, and she's a community activist, and she really brings a lot of that into her classroom. She teaches a lot about, you know, social issues and social activism and different projects that she does with her students. So it informs what they do in the classroom. Okay. Now, I'd just like to move on to how the intersection of race and gender can impact women in the job market, actually getting a job. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit of work for you to read, but you know, you're here, so I'm sure you don't mind, right? So there are two ways, of course, that we can be impacted when we're going for a job, and that can be positively and negatively. And so you can see here that in Bella's experience, you know, this person that wanted to hire her was saying, we really need you, you know, because the girls gravitate towards you because you're different. And that is an advantage. So it worked in her favor. I'm not saying this is the only reason they hired her. Of course not. She's very, very qualified and very, very experienced. But it worked in her favor to have somebody that was different for the students. Usually, it doesn't work in their favor, especially in Eikaiwa, okay, in English conversation schools, because English is sold as a product, right? And the face of English is very important. So this is a common experience that women in the study and women in the group, in the Black Women in Japan group, have had that, and I've had this experience too, that, you know, there's a specific image that the school wants to sell, and you're not it, okay, you're not it. But just going back to Bella's experience, okay, again. So this quote refers to the fact that she was applying for a part-time university position. And the person that was hiring her, which was a white male working at that school, was responsible for recruiting, told her that universities don't generally want Black people. But as you can see, she vehemently disagrees with this. She hasn't found that to be the case. And I would agree with that. I don't think it's that universities in Japan do not want to hire Black people. I think it's more that the gatekeepers to the jobs may not want to hire Black people. Now, most of the gatekeepers to these jobs, tend to be white males. And so please don't run away if you're a white male. This is not to say that everyone has that. So stay where you are, okay, you white males. This is not to generalize everyone, but there is a predominance of white male teachers at the tertiary level in Japan. And this may be because, there are some people that have been working in these positions for a long time, and they may have certain ideas that they came to Japan with, or it may just be that these men tend to hire from within their social circles. So the jobs will go to, your mates, to your friends who are generally in the same situation. But I don't feel, as like Bella, I don't feel that universities don't want to hire Black people at all. Okay, so looking at the intersection of race and gender, one thing that I've discovered in my research is that the perspectives, why is there a spelling mistake? Okay, the perspectives, okay, ignore that. The perspectives of the racial minorities and racial majorities tend to be different. And I even discovered this when I did my preliminary research. So what I mean by racial majority, if you're from a country where you are part of the racial majority, so for example, if you're white and you're from the UK or the US, or you're Black and you come from Gambia or Jamaica, coming to Japan can be a little bit of a shock. You are the racial minority for the first time. And so you may tend to perceive situations in a very different way, and you may feel that experience of racism quite keenly. Whereas on the opposite side, and Karen is from my preliminary research, she's not in it now because unfortunately she left. On the other side, if you look at people from the US or the UK who grew up as minorities and are kind of used to a certain level of racism on a daily basis, it's not, initially at least, those differences, that shock to being othered is not as stark. Initially, okay, initially, I'm not saying that's the case always. So I'm going to jump to Danielle. Because Danielle's story is very interesting because we can see that the intersection of race and gender for her worked in a very positive way, and then also in a very negative way, finally. So Danielle was a jet. She went to work on a small island off the coast of Naha, so not even on the Okinawa mainland itself. Very small island, less than 5,000 people on that island. And it was, coming to Japan itself was quite a shock for her as a Jamaican. But also she realized that soon after arriving, that she was different to what they had expected from JET. And initially that was a little off-putting for her. She felt that they really wanted a white male. And initially the students kind of reacted badly to that. They thought that she was dirty. They didn't want her to touch her You know, they asked her how many times she took her bath. Actually, one of her colleagues asked her that as well. But, you know, this is a tiny island. These people are really isolated. And I think that she may have been one of the first people of color that they had ever seen, even though it was Okinawa. And in my mind, I always thought Okinawa was more of a multicultural place. But despite this, she worked very hard. She made an effort to become close to the teachers, and she credits the fact that she was female, that she was able to create these really close relationships with the teachers and the students, and to become friends with them. They would go drinking, you know, they'd go on trips together. She became part of the community. She joined a hula group for 2 years. You know, she really did make herself comfortable there, and she felt very welcome at that point. So in this instance, we see that, you know, being female and maybe being Black too, in her mind kind of helped her to ease her way into her position. And that's just a summary. And so please tell me if I'm going through the slides a little bit too fast. There's things that you want to read. Okay, just, you know, raise your hand, let me know, shout out. Okay. So, you know, things were going really well for her. And that's the first time that I met her. I actually flew down to Okinawa. First time in Okinawa, I was very excited. It rained the entire weekend. Unbelievable. But anyway, I did get a good interview. I did get to interview her, and that was good. So skip forward to this year. About 15 months later, when I talked with her again, everything had changed. She had actually left the JET program. Was now working in an Eikaiwa, an English conversation school, and everything had changed. And she puts it down to new people coming along with very ingrained ideas about what their native speaker ALT should be. And it actually led up to her losing her job. And she had no idea about this until this happened. Let me take a drink. So she overheard some teachers talking about the new ALT that was coming. And this was the first time for her to hear this. And they were very excited because he was, you know, a real foreigner, and they would get to hear real English. And that was her first inkling that, oh, I think I'm going to lose my job because I don't really fit the image of what this new vice principal really wanted for the school. And there were a few sort of incidences before that, a little bit of passive aggressive behavior. But that idea of real English, even though English is the only language spoken in Jamaica, it does have official status. And she was just not seen as a real native speaker. And then within that whole discourse of native speaker discourse, which I have quite a big problem with, you know, there is that whole racial element as well. And I think that this whole native speaker discourse causes so much discrimination within our profession. And it often goes ignored, because it's not just about whether you come from a country that's considered to be a native speaking country, but it's also whether or not you look the part. And if you don't look the part, sometimes it means that you're out. So for Danielle, even though at the beginning things had been great, once new people came in with that ingrained idea, she felt that you know, that she was out. And so this is what she said happened within the month that she was going to leave or needed to leave. So she's already signed the JET contract for another year. She's called into a meeting at the beginning of June and told that they were not going to honor the contract. Never heard of that with 1 month. And everything that she had been doing for the past 2 years was no longer good. You know, the teachers had given her control of the classroom, but suddenly that was not allowed. You know, she had been praised constantly. She had been told that she'd been doing a good job, and now they were saying, you need to back off. And so she did back off, but then they said, you're not doing enough. So by this point, they've already decided that they want to let it go, to let her go. And she puts it down to the fact that she did not look the part and she was not considered a native speaker. And she feels that it would be different actually if she was a man, if she had been a Black male. This is all her perspective, but it's interesting how this intersection of gender and race can be, you know, a blessing, but it can also be a curse depending on who you're working with and within what context you're working. So let me move on to some positives. Okay, so talked a lot about the negatives. Okay, so a lot of the women in the study, and you know, the women in the preliminary study too, felt that they were in a unique position. They were able to provide different perspectives, a different face of English. They also felt that because they were seen as different, that it was easier to talk about, you know, difficult topics like discrimination and alienation and prejudice. It's easy to bring those up in with the students in the classes, and that this intersection actually helped them to create really strong bonds with the students, and students would seek them out. And that any misconceptions about race, or you know, the crazy things that students sometimes say, and we're glad that they say them, because then we can, you know, we can talk about it, we can deal with it. Students would just open up and they would be able to do that. But this idea of creating this bond with students, this gender and racial difference, just really creating this bond and students seeking you out. So as Kate said, when she was working in the private high school, that students would seek her out. You know, they just wanted to talk to her, and especially the biracial ones. And she was teaching in a school that had, you know, a number of biracial students. And she says that this was because it's because they thought that she would understand because she was different. It was easier to talk to her, probably a little bit like, you know, going into a bar and spilling your secrets to the bar person. It's that freedom you get from talking to someone who is very, very different to you. But this narrative of, you know, students being able to talk to me, students feeling comfortable with me, and maybe because I'm a woman, maybe because I'm a Black woman, maybe because I'm different, you know, this just comes up again and again and again and again. And I actually experience this a lot in my job. I'm very lucky to work in this great environment where there is a lot of diversity. We're all very different, but students will seek you out. And it's not always to talk about issues dealing with race. It could be issues to do being a woman, or the fact that they feel different to their classmates because their parents have got divorced or one of them have passed away. But it just kept coming up again and again and again. Okay. So at this point, this is all I'm going to say about my research. It's huge. I could talk about this all day, for days and days and days. But I would like to stop here for a moment and just take a couple of questions, because this is specifically to the research Sorry, Yoko and Sky. I said I knew I was going to wait until after the next section, but I think it might be good to put a few in here that are questions that are specifically related to the research. If you have any, you can raise your hand or, okay, great. Or put a question in the chat.
Avril, actually, I don't see any question in the chat room. So, hi, audience. If you have a question, Avril is love to talk to you. I think Yoshi.
I couldn't find how to raise my hand, so I just gave you a thumbs up.
Okay, I literally meant just raise your hand. I was talking about.
Avril, I picked up something that you said. You said sometimes it's easier to discuss difficult topics like discrimination, stereotypes, racial topics. Mm-hmm. And I think I completely understand what you mean, but sometimes I also feel like it's more difficult because you are the elephant in the room. Like in my case, I often feel like, wouldn't it be nice if a white male came and talked to my students about gender, because they might feel like they could speak more freely, like there wasn't a correct answer because I'm standing right in front of them. I just wondered what you thought about that.
I think when I first started teaching about this, that, students probably weren't as honest as I would have liked, but that's because I took it personally. Maybe I showed that I took it personally. But I think that now I try to, and I'll talk a little bit about this later too, but I try to work very hard on, and I'm sure that you do too in the classroom, creating this environment where students feel that their opinion is valued and they can say anything they want, as outrageous as it may be. They can just say anything that they want. So I've been surprised, shocked, saddened, and sometimes happy about the things that students have come out with. But I think it's to do with, I think it's the fact that I realize that it's not really about me.
Yeah, so you're framing it objectively.
Yeah, at least I'm trying to. I may go out of the class and go, oh my God, but at least within the classroom, I just want them to feel that they can say whatever they like, and then we can deal with it. But I do think it is important that, men talk about gender, maybe Caucasian people from multicultural countries talk about, the situation of race and identity. And I know that sometimes people don't feel that they are qualified for it, but it's not about that. It's not even about knowing all of the answers or knowing what the right thing is to say, but it's just opening up the discussion. Because it's all these diversity issues, whatever they may be, it's issues for all of us. Yeah. I don't know, race issues are not just for, people of color. LGBTQIA issues are not just, issues for people within that community either. It's all of our issues. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you, that's great.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any other brave souls? Is that Robert giving me the thumbs up?
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Hi. Very well. It's a really interesting talk. I'm going to ask you if you're also involved in your research in test cases about discrimination. I mean, I used to be involved in a JALT group called PALE, which is no longer around now, but it often dealt with discrimination. For example, you gave the example of non-renewal of a contract with only 1 month to go.
Yeah.
And that's actually, there's a good case that's against the law.
It is.
And there are lots of cases of foreign Japanese and foreign teachers using the various methods of the law to challenge that kind of case.
Yeah.
And JALT doesn't kind of talk so much about those issues as it did a few years ago. But I'm just curious, in your case, have you found cases of people who've gone to a union or gone to a tribunal or maybe taken someone to court on the grounds of discrimination in employment?
I haven't been involved. I mean, I don't know anyone who's actually gotten as far as the court, but within the group, within the Black Women in Japan group, we have referred people to the general union because, you know, they've suddenly been thrown out of their apartment or they've lost their job. And it does happen, unfortunately, a lot. And it happens at all levels of ELT. And it's amazing, actually, that within Danielle's case, that this could happen within the JET program because they're supposed to be protected by Claire, but she didn't actually get any support at all. So, I mean, I haven't actually been involved, but like I said, I have referred people to the union, and you do hear about it, sadly, quite a lot. Quite a lot. Do you still hear about that? Robert,
It's what happened was in the 90s, there were a few cases that went to court, and they pretty much all lost, or they had a victory, and then one case in Asahikawa in Hokkaido, a woman lost her job, went to court, got the job back.
Right.
A year later was sacked again,
Right.
went back to court, and the judge this time didn't agree with her. And
Right.
at Nagoya University, I know a case of someone who was sacked after being verbally promised, and he went to court and he lost. There's a famous case, there's the book about native speakerism that someone mentioned.
Yeah.
There's a chapter in that book about Prefectural University of Kumamoto,
Yeah.
PUK, and that's very interesting. They actually got a kind of a victory there, quite a few, I think led by women, but it wasn't just women who led. But the kind of lesson of the 90s was that you're probably going to lose if you go to court. And so people who don't get a contract renewed and suddenly get kicked out, and they usually try to just find another job as quick as they can.
Yeah, exactly.
Or try to do whatever they can. So unfortunately, and one of the main campaigners, you might know his name, Arudo Debito,
Oh,
who
yeah.
was in Hokkaido, and he's now left Japan. He still has a blog and so on, but he's not actively involved
I see.
here in Japan. Some
Yeah.
other people I know have retired or left,
Right.
and I'm kind of maybe a bit out of touch with other people. The general union is still going strong.
It's still going, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely something that we need to,
Yeah.
more attention needs to be paid. And sorry, as you were speaking, actually, I did remember that there is a woman in my group right now who is actually going to a tribunal, and she puts it down to ageism more than, you know, because of her race or that she's female. But she's a woman in her late 50s, and she just lost her job, but she's been at this job for 7 years, so she should really be full-time. And she is actually in the process of going to a tribunal.
Well, that's probably the best thing to do, and also get the union advice. It's
Definitely.
probably the best way, and you can still get a good result. But the kind of big cases from the late 90s that when I joined JALT, I heard about, they kind of resulted in mostly in the
Losses, right?
Yeah, losses, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's sad. Yeah,
But
that's
it's always I always advise people to join the union of one kind or another
right.
as a point of general principle.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
the union can, just being a member sometimes prevents somebody from being treated badly.
Okay.
I've had a few cases
Thank
where
you.
that's, you know, I've heard kind of background information that somebody, you know, wasn't touched because they were in a union.
The union. Okay, thank you. That's really good.
That's good
really
news
good
to
point.
think about.
Yeah, that's really good advice actually for all of us. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay. All right. So let's move on then to talking about cultural diversity in our classes. So I really want to talk about how we kind of represent our countries and how we represent ELT. Because there is such a very fixed idea of what a English teacher is and what they look like. And then we'll talk about how we can include more diversity in our classes. And, you know, I have tested this idea that the only thing that we need to do as people of color, perhaps, to show that there is a different face to ELT is just to be in the class. And that's what I used to think. You know, that was kind of stupid and a little bit arrogant, actually. And I was proven wrong because I asked my students to draw a picture of what they thought, what their perfect ELT was, their perfect English teacher was. And it was not somebody that looked like me. Okay, even though I'd been teaching them, and even though, you know, we had a really good relationship, great class, but it wasn't. It was generally male, generally blonde and big blue eyes, and sometimes female, blonde, big blue eyes, right? So it wasn't me. So how we talk about diversity in our classes, and I'm going to introduce you to some of the things that I do within that sphere. And I think it's really important here to think about why I teach this way. And who I am is how I teach. I really believe in this is because the students get so much more out of the class when we kind of put ourselves into it and things that are important. So by the time students get to us, as you know, they've had at least 6 years and maybe more of, you know, English, and they've looked at lots of textbooks and they've looked at lots of videos, and they may even have had ALT teachers, right? This is a picture from my son's English textbook when he was in the first grade of junior high school, which was just last year. And specifically looking at the way that, you know, the English speakers are all represented, and then how my country is represented, there is no one that looks even remotely like me. Okay. So this sort of made me think. And then another thing that happened was that some of my students used to go on an exchange or on a trip with their family to England, to London. And a couple of students came back and they said to me, oh, there's so many foreigners in London. I mean, there are a lot of tourists in London, but they probably saw a lot of people that looked like this, who were not foreigners, but Londoners. Okay, but they just couldn't get their mind around it. So I kind of realized I had to be a little bit more deliberate in the material and things I used in the classes. So things like making them understand that, you know, Britain is a multicultural country and there are so many languages spoken just in London every day. And I'm not suggesting that everyone should go in and always talk about race and you know, prejudice and discrimination, but I think that there are sort of sneaky ways that you can just put more diversity in your class by being aware of the kind of images that you use and the kind of videos that you use, you know, and you don't even have to explain it. But just showing that there's diversity of people and that all of these people come from, in my case, the UK, and lots of families look like this. Okay, just making them aware of these things. When I have more time with students and maybe in reading classes, for example, I will talk a little bit more about the Black presence in Britain. I also talk about the Asian presence in Britain because we have a huge Asian community in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. But today I'm just going to focus on Black presence. So here's some things that I use. And if you follow me on Facebook, you'll notice that I posted this on Facebook recently. We talk about Black presence in Britain. Most people think that that occurred after World War II. But this is the beachy head lady. her remains were found on a beach in East Sussex, and she's meant to be one of the first Black Britons, originally from sub-Saharan Africa, and she was there as early as 200 to 200 AD. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history lesson now on, Black British history. And, Black British history is often hidden in plain view. The Battle of Trafalgar, for example. I mean, we went on school trips to this, but we didn't know that there were this diverse group of sailors on the boat from all parts of the colony, including Africa and all parts of the empire, excuse me, including, Africa and the Caribbean. So here on the side of Nelson's column, you'll see a depiction of one of the Black sailors. This has been there for over a century. And he wasn't there as a slave, but as one of the sailors on the boat. When we get to wartime, I enjoy talking to students about, the presence of people from different parts of the British Empire as it was that time who fought for Britain. So for example, you have all of these RAF pilots from the Caribbean, Jamaica, Antigua, Barbados, and also again from the West Indies, groups of women that came over to work in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. If you want to do readings about famous people, Claudia Jones is a great example of someone whose life was sort of dedicated to feminism and freedom fighting, originally from Trinidad and Tobago. She was in America first, and then she actually got deported to the UK. And she started the first Black newspaper called the West Indian Gazette, which is actually still in circulation today, although online. And some of you may have heard of the Notting Hill Carnival, which is a great time had by all. But I think that many people don't realize that the Notting Hill Carnival grew out of a desire to end racial violence within the UK. It was part of the civil rights movement. In the 1950s, there was terrible race riots. Caribbean communities were attacked by white supremacists and teddy boys. And so as a way to bring the community back together, Claudia Jones started what would later become known as the Notting Hill Carnival, which is now the second biggest carnival in the whole world. But I think it's important to remember the origins of it, that it's not just a party, okay? Or a film with Hugh Grant. Other people that would be interesting to talk about in terms of readings or to show videos about from a historical perspective, we have Mary Seacole. I'm happy to know that more people know about her now. She was in the Crimean War at the same time as Florence Nightingale, helping the soldiers. But the difference between her and Florence was that she was actually on the battlefield, tending to the soldiers. And she was actually really supported by royalty when she came home, but then her history was forgotten. And then then it was resurrected. And unlike Florence Nightingale, she didn't have any money from the government to go and build these hospitals. She wrote a book and she sold it, and then she got donations from gentry and from royalty, and that's how she went to the Crimea. Originally from Jamaica, and she died in the UK. And then we have, today's people, Diane Abbott. No matter how you feel about her, the Labour Party, first Black female MP, actors like Idris Elba, and not Black, but Asian, first Muslim mayor in London. I think it's really great. If you want to do a reading about a famous person in the UK, just be aware of, just have it in your mind that, people from the UK, we're all shapes and sizes, and we're all doing amazing, amazing things. Okay. And so I'm just going to go on to, how much time do I have? Oh goodness, I need to stop talking soon. Right, I'm going on to my actual class that's called Cultural Diversity. And I love this class. It's really a very me class. So I teach exactly what I want and how I want. And it's a content-based class. And we look at cultural diversity, stereotypes, racial and ethnic discrimination in Japan. And we also talk about biracial people in Japan. So students come to this class and they think, yay, cultural diversity, I'm going to learn all about the food in Italy. And then they realize that no, it's you're actually learning probably more about Japan because you're looking at the diversity that's around you. This is your area of influence. And of course, I may use Britain and other countries as comparison, but our focus is on Japan, right? You know, and as teachers, you know, we all want to broaden our students' horizons and hopefully foster attitudes that are not prone to racism and prejudice in the future. So, get off my soapbox now. So, this refers a little bit to something that Yoshi said before, you know, how to create this environment. You know, we really need to be cognizant that the students are coming from a place where they haven't, especially for me, I teach mainly first years, you know, they haven't much chance to express their opinions. They may not know what their opinions are, and they may not want to express those opinions in front of a lot of people anyway. So really having to make sure that they feel comfortable in the class and do lots of team building activities, you know, whatever it is that that you like to do. I like to start my classes with music. I have students walking around, and then I'll ask them, you know, have a question for them. And it could just be something like, what makes you happy? Okay. What can make you happy? So they really get to know each other. Sometimes they choose the questions. And then during the classes as well, I'm constantly watching my students for their reactions, and I'm checking in with them and making sure that they're, you know, that they're okay, that they're understanding, number one, and that they're not feeling, you know, kind of put out or uncomfortable. Because talking about racism is quite uncomfortable, you know, for all of us, but especially for students that have never even really thought about it, right? And then in this class, I have students hand in weekly reflections where they will reflect on what we've done in class. I may ask them a question, but it's also a chance for them to write the things that they couldn't say or they felt too shy to say, or maybe things they didn't like about the class or they disagreed with. But the reflections are, and just a great way to get to know your students, right? So here are some of the things that I will do in the class. You know, we talk about what stereotypes are and how they are formed. And this is important because, you know, students do have kind of one-dimensional ideas of different groups of people sometimes. I realized this 12 years ago when a student said this in my class. Okay. So blacks are good at singing and dancing, a little wild and lazy, I guess. And when I asked her about it more, because I thought, well, maybe she's had some experience with a black person, but it turned out that the only black person that she had ever interacted with was me, right? And, you know, I was like, wild, lazy, crazy, maybe, but, you know, generally not, you know, wild. But it just turned out that that's the message that she was getting from the media. It's mainly the things that she had seen on TV. But I'm glad that she said it, because again, we could then unpack it and we could, you know, talk about it. So going back to cultural stereotypes, I ask students which of these pictures represents Japan to you. Okay. And they always say these two, of course. But then they recognize that this is also Japan. Right? There are homeless people here too. And then we look at Africa. Okay, Africa as a country really annoys me. And we look at these pictures, and we compare which one of these sets of pictures represents Africa. And they always say these two. But of course, this is part of Africa's story too. And they're really surprised to know that there could be just university students like this who are just, you know, happy and healthy and studying. And that there may be rich people in different African countries. And then that leads on to discussions of cultural stereotypes, and they get to talk about it. Okay. They may get to go home and think about it, and then come back and talk about it. Another resource that I use is The Danger of a Single Story. I love this. I love this. I just love her. She's brilliant. Okay. And it's really great way to get students to talk about what is that single story, and then students, you know, will reflect on it and maybe write about it. They may take a quote out of there and to think about what that means, and then to question, well, who do I have a single story about? Last semester when I did this, this is what came out for my students. You know, I'm afraid of black men. I don't know why. I don't know any black men. Never met any black men. I've been taught by one, but I don't know why. But I was able to tell that student, it's not really your fault, because you are getting bombarded sometimes with images like this, okay? Which I'm sure you've all maybe familiar with the NHK video, okay? You perhaps have had more images like this, which are actually very memorable, than like this, okay? Even though he was the President of the United States. Okay? So then we can compare and contrast those things. And then we can summarize it. And again, asking these difficult questions. Do you think racism exists in Japan? That's a difficult question. And I will tell students, you know, these are not pleasant topics, okay? But if we don't talk about them, then we can't change them, and we can't improve upon this. So not pleasant topics. And then a discussion of what racism may look like in all of its forms. You know, sometimes it's very blatant. Sometimes it's not. Okay. This is from Bayer McNeil's article, but I thought it illustrated that gaijin seat issue really well. And this is also, for me at least, an opportunity where I can kind of, I don't always talk about my experience in the class, but I kind of do talk about sometimes the things that I'm worried about. You know, I talk about my kids. You know, I have a son who's 14, and, you know, he's beginning to take the train together. My son is biracial. His father is Japanese, but for all intents and purposes, from the way that he looks like a foreigner. And this is happening to him on the train. And it's amazing, because I've had students come back to me and write in their reflections, you know, I was on the train today and there was a foreigner and I sat next to them because nobody else did. But this is something that maybe they weren't conscious of, but they see this on the train all the time, especially in Nagoya. Okay. I use the But We're Speaking Japanese video, which is a really great resource, because it shows that even when you do speak the language, that sometimes you're not seen as being understandable. You know, people look at your face and say, well, you can't speak Japanese, therefore I can't understand you. And it's a funny video. It's kind of a nice way to end the class. And then I'm more likely to have them reflect on a question like this. So for those of you, has everyone's familiar with But We're Speaking Japanese video, right? More or less. So basically it's a group of foreigners who speak, just for those who aren't, a group of foreigners in a restaurant who speak Japanese really, really well. And there's one Asian American who doesn't speak Japanese at all, speaks only English. But when the waitress comes, she only speaks to the Asian American person. They're like, but we're speaking Japanese. Their Japanese is amazing. So we watched that, and you know, the serious side to the situation, we talk about that later. Like if I go to the doctor and the doctor's just so freaked out that I'm a foreigner and they're not going to talk to me properly, well, that's a serious side. It's kind of good because a lot of my students are foreigners, are doctors, sorry, doctors. I need to keep an eye on the time. So there's I have lots of resources here, which we don't really have time to go through now, but I'd be happy to share them with you if you would like to contact me. That's the Who is Japanese, Life as a Half Black Japanese High School Girl. This is a great video. It's a great video, and it's short as well to use in the classroom. So we have just a little bit of time left, and I really want you to have the chance to share your ideas. I've been talking far too much, and now I'd like you to have a chance to talk. So, you know, diversity of all kinds is important to bring into the class, but just for today, let's focus on cultural diversity. How can you bring more of that into your class? What are you doing now? You know, share those ideas with your group. And then how can you include more? You know, is it through the images, the videos that you use? If you have any resources, any ideas, share them with your group. And then when we come back, we'll share them together. So Yoko, where are you? Can't see you. Or Scott, who's going to, oh, I have the control, right? I'm the host, I forgot, sorry. I've got the power. So what I'd like to do now is to put you into breakout rooms. I know it's like a lesson, isn't it? Yeah, you have to do a bit of work, okay? Just to talk about these two questions. What do you do now in terms of cultural diversity, and what could you do? Think about what you're teaching right now. How could you bring more in, okay? And if it's you don't know, I don't know, that's fine. Okay, I think I have to stop the share. Oh, here we are. Right. I don't think I do have the control, sorry, for breakout rooms.
Okay, so Avril, how many groups do you want to make for breakfast?
How many do we have? We have 15.
And now, yes, so 15 including us. So
Including us. Let's do small.
oh, Linda. Linda, do you have any question to her? I got a message from Linda.
So Linda doesn't have a mic?
No mic. Oh, I see. Linda, you can type the question in a chat room.
Oh, Linda. Hello, Linda.
So Avril can answer later. So
yeah.
By the way, Avril,
yeah.
We are 15 members right now.
Okay, so are you and Scott going to join the groups?
Yes,
yeah.
So
let's do sort of groups of like 3 or 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. And how long?
What time is it? Looking at the time. So I think we have about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay.